Good afternoon. My name is Orris Stewart, and I'm the Chief People and Inclusion Officer for the NBA and Board Treasurer for the National Black MBA Association. This is the 50th year of the association, a year during which we celebrate the vision of our founders and embrace the current visionaries who are guiding our collective success for the next 50 years. I want to thank you for joining us for our 2020 Conference and Career Fair, a virtual experience. And welcome to the Leadership Studio, sponsored by Accenture. During the session, you'll hear from an incredible and inspiring leader on how to make the most of your professional journey. Thank you for joining and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It is great to be celebrating not only our past visionaries, but also our current ones. And speaking of visionaries, let's bring in Marty Rodgers, Market Unit Lead of the U.S. South for Accenture, a leading global professional services firm, and the host for today's session. Marty wants to interact with all of you as he shares his leadership journey and talks about the traits of great leaders. Marty, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, DeRay. Appreciate that. And thanks for the warm welcome. Also appreciate the kind remarks in the video from Orris as well, from the MBA. Delighted to be with everyone. Good afternoon. I know it's been a full and rewarding day for everyone. And my name once again is Marty Rodgers. I put all of my contact information in the chat so that we can have this as an ongoing conversation, not just for today, but in the future as well. And encourage you to reach out and have a discussion around leadership as we go forward. As Terry mentioned, I have the honor of leading Accenture's work in the South, and I have all the P&L responsibility for that. And that's across 15 states and 24 cities. And it is a business of over $4 billion. And I manage over 15,000 people as part of that responsibility. But more importantly, I'm also talking to you today and sharing these perspectives on the traits of inspiring leaders based on other experiences that I've had and other mentors that I've had on the journey. And I'll share a lot of my mentors with you. But also, much more importantly than my title or my company, I'm speaking to you today as a husband, as a father, as a son, a friend, a colleague, and hopefully a change maker. And also, I'm speaking to you as a descendant of slaves. I speak to you today as someone walking on the same journey, very, very humbly, the same journey that we call life. And you'll hear more about this as we go on. And I share some of the leadership frameworks and the traits of great leaders. But from the outset, and before we get into that, and especially in these really tough and challenging times with COVID, which, as we all know, has affected our community of Black and brown folks disproportionately. And as we all see these difficult days, including the disruption from structural and lethal racism, I think it's really important that we pause and we celebrate a bit when we have the occasion to, and when we have good things happen and good news happen, and that we pause also to reflect and then to act in addition to that celebration. So I would be remiss, first and foremost, if we didn't pause and celebrate the National Black MBA Association. It has meant a lot to all of us on this call, myself included in terms of being part of my journey. And this conference celebrates 50 years of a remarkable institution that has opened up doors of educational opportunity, that has helped create new career pathways, some of which none of us would have imagined beforehand, and has also provided an opportunity to create wealth for our communities, for our people, and for our families. So it's important that we pause and we celebrate the legacy, the past, but also the present and also the future of the National Black MBA Association and all that it has meant for all of us. It's also fittingly that we are celebrating visionaries today. Ironically, I would contend it is in those darkest moments, in the most challenging times, in the most trying times, that we especially need vision. We need creativity and innovation. We need, as Cornel West would say, the blue note. And it is without vision that the people perish. It is actually ironically in these times when we all tend to hunker down, that we actually need to open our aperture and think bigger and broader and bolder, to have optimism meet pessimism, to have love meet hate, to go bold or to go home. And the National Black MBA Association has to be part of that journey for all of us in terms of helping all of us aspire as leaders to think bigger and bolder and to make a difference. Second, also from the outset, I would be remiss not to start and to clearly state, to unequivocally state, a sense of profound outrage at last night's events. We have to speak her name, Breonna Taylor. And last evening, I ironically was in line here in Washington, D.C., with my kids, taking them, my two daughters and my son, to pay tribute to the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg. And while in line, we learned of the Breonna Taylor verdict. And my kids, both my son and my daughters, were devastated. Pain on top of pain. We're going to talk about learning from low moments today, and we're going to talk about having the courage to use our power and our voice. Now is that time. We cannot wait. And I know I don't have to tell you that in this moment, this meeting time for change, but this time beckons and calls all of us. And later we will ask, what did we do in this moment? What did we do as business leaders, but also what did we do as husbands, as fathers, as sons, as community leaders? And that will define us, both who we are today, but also more importantly, who we will be remembered as tomorrow. Third and finally, in terms of opening up and getting going, I hope you've had a good conference so far, right? That it has helped you get regrounded and get reset, that it's hopefully it's also helped you get a little inspired. And I know there's been a lot of other great sessions of charting your own journey, leading with heart, equipping yourself to succeed and pivoting to meet where we are. One of the things that Accenture has been always really proud of sponsoring the National Black MBA Association, both as a partner but also as a client, is because it provides this forum for us to come together as a family, but also for us to come together and learn and grow and develop and to be there for each other as a powerful, powerful network, and a network that can bring about change, not just in business, but in the broader society as well. So with that introduction, let's jump in. Today, we're going to discuss 4 traits of leadership. And as Teray mentioned, I love for the discussion to be as interactive as possible. And so just to get us started, what I would ask you to do in the chat box is to start sharing your thoughts on what are those traits of inspiring leaders. Think of folks that you have worked with, think of folks that you have looked up to. What are those characteristics of inspiring leaders? What made them inspiring? And if you get a chance, if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat box and getting us going, that would be really fantastic. You can mention traits, or you can mention particular people, those folks that you have found inspiring. And as folks are entering that into the chat and getting going, I think it's important to underscore right from the start. It's estimated that each and every one of us makes about 35,000 decisions a day. And leadership is the sum of many of those decisions, big and small. And what I would ask is you think about those traits and you think about what defines leadership for you and personally for you. It's important that we get a sense for leadership in the context of 4 traits that have been leadership that I've learned from others, and in particular my mentors, and that each of us wrestles with and becomes the optimal leader that each of us can become. So with that, let me just see what I can see in the chat room in terms of, all right, we got a lot of that. Let me see. Wow, we're scrolling down. So transparency, humility, authenticity, compassion, resilience, knowledge, empathy, lots of empathy, honesty, vulnerability, relatability, humility. You guys are setting me up really well for what's to come. Effective communication, ability to serve, and to serve in all capacities, inspiration, and not ironically from somebody named Churchill. So that's pretty awesome. So with that, let's jump in. I'm going to share kind of my 4 lessons of leadership and traits of inspiring leaders, and tell you a little bit about my own journey and my own mentors as we go. And we're going to move pretty fast. Some of what I'm going to teach you is stuff that is normally done over the course of a 3-day course. So stay with me, and feel free to ask questions or propose thoughts or reflections as we go. So to get started, 4 characteristics and traits of inspiring leaders. First, authenticity. Second, the power to name is the power to define and to envision. Third, they have the ability to listen and learn from everyone, and they walk humbly, and they respect everyone on the journey, and they have the passion and courage to change. And then fourth and finally, this idea that leadership and service and stewardship are inextricably linked, and that you can't define leadership without defining and having a definition of service. And so with that, I think it's important to get us going around this first definition around authenticity. So folks, it's estimated that there are 2 books put out nationally each and every week on leadership. When you go into your bookstores, there's thousands of these books. And I'm going to tell you the 2 leadership gurus, and again, there's hundreds of these gurus, but the 2 that have made the most difference in my life, and the 2 most powerful folks that have really taught me lessons of leadership that have been profound. The first is, and I'll leave this with you, and as we go through, I'm going to have a variety of different nuggets to share with you, but also some homework assignments as part of it. The best book on leadership that I've ever read is by a guy named Ronald Heifetz, who's a professor at Harvard that I had at the Harvard Kennedy School, but he also teaches at the business school as well. He wrote a book called Leadership Without Easy Answers. That's Leadership Without Easy Answers. And strongly recommend that book if you get a chance to read that. And then the one that we're going to delve into today is the teachings of a guy by the name of Dr. Noel Tichy, who's a professor at the University of Michigan. Now, I went to the University of Notre Dame, so just trust me. If I could not give props to somebody from the University of Michigan, I would pass if I could. But this individual and his teachings have changed my life, and his teachings undergird and are the foundation of all of the leadership programs for Accenture. And then he also was the person that put the leadership program in place for General Electric under the famous Jack Welch. And then he also has done numerous other companies, Pfizer and other companies along the way. So talking about this first trait of authenticity. And if I was to boil this 3-day course down to kind of one central lesson, what Tichy is teaching, and I will attempt to prove it to you in record speed, but what Tichy is teaching fundamentally is he is saying that the best leaders are authentic leaders. The best leaders are authentic leaders. And so what he's saying is, if you're not bringing your full self to work, if you're not who you are in the workplace, if you're not fully you, then you can't be your best, you can't lead, right? And we're sub-optimizing both for the company, but also for yourself if there's not a spirit of inclusion and diversity and equality that allows you to be you. And so Tichy then says, and if you hold that premise that authentic leaders are best leaders, and that's what all his research and other stuff has shown, then the question becomes twofold. First, how do you define authenticity? And then second, given that definition of authenticity, how do you go about the process of becoming more authentic? And so the first piece around definition of authenticity, if folks can put in the chat room, or I don't know if there's other ways to put it, but the first person that puts in the chat room, who is Dr. Howard Thurman? Does anybody know who Dr. Thurman is? Checking out the chat room as we go. Let's see a couple of Peace Corps folks and otherwise. Anybody know Dr. Howard Thurman? All right. Sonia, can you can you just type up quickly anything? All right, there you go. All right, okay. So Thomas looked like he might have knew it even better or grabbed it online. So the key thing, if you don't know Dr. Thurman, here's your second homework assignment. So I gave you the book by Heifetz. The next book I'm going to give you is by Dr. Howard Thurman, called The Sound of the Genuine. And how Dr. Thurman was a professor originally at Morehouse, and then he later became dean of the chapel at Howard. And if you're in Rankin Chapel, he's the middle pane. He's the middle stained glass window. And just a profound brother. And the thing that he talks about in terms of defining authenticity, and it's the most powerful definition I've ever come across, is he suggests, and yes, he was an advisor to Dr. King. What Dr. Thurman suggests is that, and how he defines authenticity, is that each of us is, in point of fact, three separate people. Now, he wasn't suggesting, massive schizophrenia or anything like that. But what he was saying is we are who others perceive us to be, right? And perceive us to be up close and personal, and right next to us, sitting at the table, sitting at the dinner table, sitting in the workplace together. Maybe we don't do that as much with COVID, but up close and personal, but also a little further away. We are also who we perceive ourselves to be. We are who we perceive ourselves to be. And folks, as people of color and as women, there's all types of baggage that we get bombarded with, and all types of stereotypes and media images and other crap that they send our way, right? That can defeat and can harm our self-image. And we got to fight that tooth and nail, right? Because that definition is a key part of how we're going to wrestle with this idea of authenticity. And then third and finally, there is who we are in point of fact. So once again, there's who others perceive us to be, up close and personal and a little further away. There's who we perceive ourselves to be, as difficult as that is. And then third and finally, there is who we are in point of fact. And what Dr. Thurman says so profoundly is, the greater the delta, the greater the dispersion, the greater the spread between those three things, the more problems you're going to have in life, both personally and professionally. And so what the challenge of leadership is about, and what the challenge of authenticity is about reconciling those three, and about bringing those three together, and about making them one, or bringing them as close together as we can. And so if that is our definition, if we're wrestling with that, and if we have the courage to wrestle with that, right? To do that hard personal work, and to do it consistently, and to align those consistently, then the question becomes, for all of us, can we put in that work? Do we have that courage to bring and align those three alternative realities? Dr. Thurman, in terms of what he's sharing, right? He's saying, hey, ultimately, we've got to bring all three of those together. And folks, I know that sounds simple, but it's super, super hard. Gandhi would say, my life is my message. And Mother Teresa would say, it is ultimately the gap between how others perceive her and who she was in point of fact that brought her to her knees each and every day in prayer. So this is not easy work. This is hard work. So if we accept that as our definition of authenticity, and now we move forward and we think then, okay, well, what about this idea of how then do I become more authentic? And there's a picture of Tishi there. And now as we move forward, next up, what Tishi suggests is you have to have the courage to tap into who you are. And you are a sum of those decisions, and you are a sum of those experiences that you have made on your life's journey. And what he literally suggests is that you have to map out the highs and the lows of your journey. And as you do that, and you have to do both your personal and your professional journey line and put it all together on one page, what he suggests is that it is in mapping out those high and low moments in every moment in between. It is in those moments that you have described your journey that if you have the courage to do so and to put it out there, that at each of those stages that you decide to put on that map, you have a story to share. You have a life lesson to impart. And then the question becomes, do you have the courage to share it? Do you have the courage to do the journey line? And then do you have the courage to share it? And at the end of the day, folks follow you, not because you teach them to burn up a spreadsheet, not because you teach them to go and code better or to fix a widget or to do zero-based budgeting or supply chain management or anything else. Folks follow you because you have the courage to share your wisdom and your experience, because you have the courage to share your story and to lead them with the confidence that comes from your aligning those three definitions of authenticity and three definitions of yourself, and because you have the courage and the confidence stemming from that to step forward and to lead others in your own skin and in your own voice. So, I know that's a lot, and I know you see a whole lot of things on this chart. This is my journey line. I don't have time in the course of this conversation to take you through all the details of my journey line, but some key things. First, despite the success that I've enjoyed to date and where I am right now, you'll see a heck of a lot of failure on the journey. If you look at those moments, those low moments, right? You'll see lots of them. Big deals lost, delivery challenges, the loss of my dad, my first year in college, et cetera, right? And what Tishi proposes is that, again, at each of those dots on the journey, there is a teachable point of view for us to share. And in particular, what he says is it is at those highest of high moments, but even more so in the lowest of low moments, in the muck, in the dirt, in the pain, right? It's in those moments that we find ourselves, that we find our humanity, that we find who we are, that we find life's lessons of what's really important. And maybe if we'd extrapolate for just 1 second, maybe it's in those lowest of low moments in this country and in this world that from that pain that we experience right now, from COVID and from structural and lethal racism, maybe it's in those moments that this country is going through right now that we find the wisdom for a new and brighter day. And so, folks, at some other point in the journey, and we can do this later, if you complete your journey line, I promise to share mine and vice versa. And again, my contact info is in the chat room. If you will work on your journey line, I'm happy to listen to it, to share it, and to work with you on it. Again, it has to be personal and professional. If you decide to put a dot on there, it means there is a story, a teachable point of view to share. It is both the highs and the lows and everything in between, and you'll find you're moving the dots around all the time. as you continue to have the courage to wrestle with it. And again, when you have the courage to put it on paper and then to share it, what you will find is that you have to not just share what happened, but what did you learn? But what did you learn? And I have a longer video that I can show at some other point in time of a talk I gave, sharing one teachable point of view from my first year at Notre Dame. And we may touch on a little bit of that later as we go. Okay, so I know that's a lot. And I know I just threw this big theory at you and mentioned a couple of professors and theologians with doctorates and you should still believe, right? So let me give you just 3 really quick examples to bring this home so that you can, hopefully have confidence in this and invest the time, because time is valuable, folks. And hopefully when you hear these examples, it'll resonate and you'll say, wow, Tishi's right. Thurman's right. And I've got to put the time in to do this. Okay? So, going back to the chat room, how many folks on the call have seen the King's Speech? How many folks have seen the King's Speech? It was a movie that came out. All right, Elaine has seen one. Alexis. All right, we're getting some good responses. Lots of yes, couple of greats. I have, etc. Colin Firth, you even know the main actor, etc. So normally, if I had a chance to be with all of you live and I could bring some of you off mute, I'd have a conversation with you about what the movie is. So regretfully, I've got to give it away and I got to tell you some of the story. But your next homework assignment, should you choose to accept it, so we got Leadership Without Easy Answers. We've got the Tishi's Journey Line and Story. And then one of the next homework assignments that I would ask you to think about is to take the time to watch the King's Speech or rewatch it if you haven't watched it before. So jumping really quickly into the King's Speech. So the King's Speech is a movie and it talks about the King of England. And the King of England, folks, this wasn't an ordinary time. The King of England, by the way, wasn't even supposed to be the king, right? And he ascended to the throne, and when he was growing up, his dad was a bit of a butthead, and his dad, who was the king, abused him and mistreated him, and he was the son that was often put off in the corner and was shunned. He had a serious speech impediment, and as he grew older, the worse it became. He tried repeatedly to get past it, failed miserably, and it was painful. And so he had an older brother, and the older brother was handsome, and the older brother was a wonderful communicator and was also, however, a bit of a playboy as well. And he was the dad's favorite. And he was the one that was destined to be king. And everyone knew it. But sometimes things intervene. And at this particular time, at this moment in history, this isn't just any other ordinary moment. This is right at the onset of World War II. And so, folks, the king dies. We're right at the onset of World War II, and Germany is declaring war on Europe. And the term blitzkrieg literally comes from the fact that Germany was kicking so much butt, and it was so easy that they were just going right across all of Europe. Nobody was offering much of any resistance. So country after country after country falls. And next up, folks, on the list, England, Great Britain. And in the moment, the king has died. And the person who had been groomed, who had been made ready to be king his whole life, decides to abdicate the throne. And he decides to abdicate the throne. The older brother decides to abdicate the throne because And see if this story sounds familiar, folks. The king-to-be fell in love. And you know what? He fell in love with an American. And not only that, he fell in love with an American divorcee. And despite the carriages and the jewels and the castles and all of the accoutrements, the brother fell in love. And so he gave it all away to marry this American, this divorcee. And so the other remaining brother has to step up to the crown at this critical moment. And Mamiya, you got it, right? Meghan and Harry all over again. And at this critical moment, the brother who was never supposed to be king has to step to the throne. And so he goes out, and with his wife's encouragement and help, he goes and he gets an instructor who wasn't even a doctor, but had worked with veterans coming out of World War I and had created unusual therapies and treatments based on his work with those veterans. And not only that, he was not only not a doctor, and not only was he doing unconventional therapies, but he wasn't even British. And so the wife goes out, finds this person, encourages the king to use this individual to help him get past his speech impediment. He's not even of the same class. And this man transforms the newly appointed king. And folks, back then, remember, Germany's coming. Nothing's stopping them. Germany's coming. And we on the other side of the pond, very unclear what we're going to do, if we're even going to come in and help. Germany's coming. And so it becomes time where the king has to give his first speech, his first radio address. Because again, back then, we didn't have all the fancy Twitters and other things that we got today. And he couldn't just write something for the paper. He had to go and step forward and give this radio address. And folks, it wasn't just the people of England that were listening. The whole world was listening. And the king, speech impediment and all, literally has to step up to the live mic. And he steps up and he gives and delivers one of the best speeches in human history. He does so, and if you listen to it, and both in the movie or otherwise, when you listen to it, you can hear him struggling and fighting his speech impediment as he delivers the message for his people and for the world. As he gets his people ready for the death, deprivation, starvation, pain, loss, hurt that was to come and that they would have to endure for years, for the bombings, for the fighting, for the scarcity. His battling through his impediment to deliver his remarks, his talking about his journey, goes and ends up giving, again, one of the greatest speeches in history. It becomes a metaphor for what they, in turn, would have to endure. So please, watch the King's speech. Second example. Next, if you can go back to the chat, who can tell me what happened on April 4th, 1968? April 4th, 1968. All right, Ruth, don't go watch it yet. You can do that as your next homework assignment. Who can tell me? Yes, the assassination of MLK. We lost a king. Well said, Angela. So, April 4th, 1968. 6:02 p.m., the Lorraine Motel, Memphis, Tennessee. James Earl Ray assassinates Martin Luther King on the balcony with a long-range rifle. As Angela said in the chat, we lost a king, our king. And so that evening, all across the country, including where I sit today, here in Washington, D.C., many of our major cities are still scarred today from that evening, from the violence, from the burning, from the looting, from the pain of that horrible, horrible evening. And riots broke out everywhere, in almost every major city except one. Anybody know what that one city happened to be? You can put it in the chat if you do. So that one city was Indianapolis, Indiana. And that day in Indianapolis, a young presidential candidate had been going all around the state of Indiana. He had been going around the state of Indiana because he'd gotten in the race late. And he was going to have to catch up if he wanted to become the Democratic nominee and eventually become president. And so Indiana was critically important, as would later be California. And this young presidential candidate comes in, and again, folks, we have to take ourselves back to that day. And your homework assignment now is to watch that on YouTube. And he goes and he's coming to see the Indianapolis crowd. And folks, they've been queuing up all day. And they didn't have cell phones, and they didn't have beepers and pagers, and they didn't have Twitter and iPads and all this other stuff. There's no instant news. And so we have this moment where Robert F. Kennedy is about to go address this crowd that's been waiting all day to hear him, this largely inner city crowd. And before he goes on stage and he steps up to the mic, the Secret Service and the FBI tell him that Martin Luther King has been assassinated, that violence is already starting to break out. And we cannot protect you. We cannot protect you. We have to go right now. And Robert F. Kennedy brushes him off. And he says, hey, folks, I have to be the one to tell the crowd. And so he literally goes, and if you watch this on YouTube, he literally goes and he steps up to the mic and he tells the people what has occurred in Memphis. And you hear the shock and the awe and the horror and the pain ripple through the entire crowd. And Robert F. Kennedy then goes on to tell the crowd that he knew Martin Luther King. And he tells them that if they are to honor him and to honor his memory, then they must be about nonviolence. They must advance his mission in this moment, especially this moment. And they must go home and pray for him and his family and for all that he believed in. And again, folks, coming back to Tishi and coming back to the journey line, Robert F. Kennedy says we must rededicate ourselves to what he fought for and what he died for. And then he tells the crowd, I know your pain. Because I too have lost a loved one at the tip end of a rifle's bullet. I lost my brother in Dallas. And to this crowd, Robert F. Kennedy goes and he shares a poem in this moment from his favorite poet. a poet by the name of Aeschylus, Greek poet. And he says, the poet says, in our sleep, pain, which we cannot forget, falls drop by drop upon the human heart, until, against our will, and only through the awful grace of God, comes wisdom. And so, folks, again, if you go back for just 1 second and you take a look at the journey line, that's what Tishi's saying. From those lowest of low moments, from those experiences, there is truth, there is wisdom. And do you have the courage to tap into it? And do you have the courage to share your story with others? If you do, then they'll follow you. Last thing, and then hopefully you'll be convinced of this methodology and this approach. How many folks on this chat go to church? How many folks on this chat go to church? And I know it's COVID and all, but you know what I mean. All right. So I do as well. And I would just say, every now and then when you're in church, folks, it depends on what church you go to, but every now and then when you're in church, folks get the Spirit. And when they do, they stand up and they do what we call testify. Testify. And folks, if we think a little bit and we think about the justice that just passed and our courts and everything else, we also realize that when you go to tell what you saw happen, you have to place your hand on the Bible when you're about to testify. And you say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. The truth. Right? Testify. And nowadays on Yelp and Craigslist and a million other things and different rating services, there's a million different things, right? Where you're going to write a testimonial. And so, folks, the common word there is test. You have experienced something. You have seen something. You have witnessed something. You have felt something. And you know it to be true. You have been tested. And from that test is truth, is wisdom, is what life's all about. And again, folks, that's what Tishi is saying. Can you tap into that truth? And do you have the courage to share it? Okay, so hopefully that has convinced you about the importance of this framework and you have the courage to do it and to share your story. I encourage you, if you do it, feel free to share it with me. Feel free to share it with others around you that you trust. Feel free to share it with your teams, etc. And you will get better each time you do it. All right, next up. All right, and we're gonna move fast so we have time for Q&A as well. All right, next up. So I know that first lesson around authenticity took a while, but it's the most important one, and that's why we drained it. We'll move faster as we go forward. So next up, next lesson and trait of leadership and inspiring leaders. Normally, folks, when I'm doing my journey line, the journey line tells you a lot about me, right? And I would go through that if we had time, and those highs and those lows and the wisdom on the way. But the other way that I talk about myself and get you to know who I am is to tell you a little bit about my name. My full name is Martin William Rodgers. Martin is from St. Martin de Porres, who is a Black Catholic saint from Lima, Peru. William is actually Guillermo, as my paternal grandmother was from Colombia. And Rodgers is spelled Rodgers. Rodgers. And folks, I get pissed off when folks misspell my name. And it happens all the time. And the reason they misspell my name, I get it. Hey, I understand, right? There's somebody a lot more famous with the last name Rodgers. Mr. Rodgers. And, no beef. That brother was from Pittsburgh. I'm from Philly originally. Got that little cross-sectional rivalry. He wears sweaters, I wear suits. The brother had Tom Hanks do a movie about him. I get it, right? A lot more famous than me. But and all props, in all seriousness, to Mr. Rodgers, one of the greatest educators of our time. But the reason I get upset about it is because Rodgers without the D is our old slave name. We trace our family tree to the Rodgers and the Blackwells, and a slave in particular by the name of Mama Puss Blackwell. And we trace that family tree to a slave plantation not so far from here in Broadnax, Virginia. I live and work here in Washington, D.C. And I have been on those grounds. My father took me when I was little. My grandfather added a D to our name to remember, but also to disassociate from that name. He believed that the power to name is the power to define. The power to name is the power to define. This is my grandfather. He's on the far left as you're looking at the screen, 3 down. This is the 3rd class at Morehouse. After it transitioned from Atlanta Baptist in 1918 is this class picture. The power to name is the power to define. So, folks, everyone on this call has power. You have power. Will you use that power and voice? Will you only use it for yourself, or will you use it for others, including those not on this call? Okay, so you guys lost me for a little bit. Can you guys hear me now? Can you see the slides? Okay, so everybody's good. Sorry about that. Let me go back a little bit and then I'll go forward. So what I was saying is that's my grandfather, 3 down on the left. That's the 3rd class at Morehouse after it transitioned from Atlanta Baptist. He added a D to our name to remember, but also to disassociate from that name and from that history. We could not name ourselves, so he took the name back. The power to name is the power to define. And everyone on this call has power. You have it by virtue of your education, both your graduate degree and your undergraduate degree, and even your high school. You have it by virtue of the wealth that you've created and amassed so far and the potential to amass it. You have it by virtue of your community and all the nonprofits and other things that you're engaged in. And you have it by virtue of all of the companies that you have worked for and all of the things that are on your resume. But the question becomes, knowing that you have power, will you use that power? Will you use your voice? Will you use your power and your voice just for yourself? Or will you use it for others, including those not so fortunate to be on this call with us today? And so let's think about that for a second. The power of our voice, the power to name and to define. As you climb higher up, and you see this every day with the president, right? They call it the bully pulpit, because at that stature, he can define the terms of the debate. He can do it with a tweet. He can do it from the podium. He can do it just by virtue of where he is. And as we become more and more powerful, as we have more and more opportunities, we have more and more influence to be able to set the terms of the dialogue and the terms of the debate. Words matter. Names matter. And so, folks, we can say that the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. We can say our clients can never change, or we can help them change. Our country can never change, or we can change our country. We can call it COVID-19, or we can call it the China virus. We can call it fake news or the fourth estate. Not so far from here in Washington, D.C., there's the Museum of the American Indian. As you're walking through that museum, you'll suddenly see in one of the exhibits a swastika. And you're like, whoa, like what is that doing here in the middle of the National Museum of the American Indian? And it turns out, folks, that the swastika was originally a native symbol. It was a native symbol to symbolize the four seasons and the four winds. And Hitler would misappropriate it to a symbol of death, genocide, and destruction, of hate. The power to name is the power to define. On June 4th, 1989, thousands of people died. Young brothers of Asian descent stood up in front of tanks. Young people just like you had the courage to fight for democracy, to stand up for what they believed in, to fight and to give their lives for others and for what they thought was right. They stood in front not just of guns, but of tanks. And thousands upon thousands died in Tiananmen Square. And so, folks, in China today, if you type in June 4th, it's immediately censored from the internet. And you run the risk of being investigated. And so those who would rise up, those who would still fight, have coined a new term, May 35th. May 35th. We can call it the Defense of Marriage Act, or we can call it bigotry. We can call them weapons of mass destruction, or we can just call them leaky barrels. We can say that some of our other brothers have accents or speak funny English, or we can say they're bilingual. The choice is ours. We can say Black Lives Matter, or we can say all lives matter, or blue lives matter. The power to name is the power to define. Will you use your power? Will you use your voice? Folks, my life has been filled with many, many blessings. 3 of them you see right there. My wife and I have 3 amazing kids. The oldest is Malcolm. The middle one is Zora. And the little one we took a chance with. The little one's named May-J. Malcolm's named after Malcolm X. Zora after Zora Neale Hurston. And May's, it's always risky when you name somebody after somebody still living. We all learned that with the whole Tiger Woods thing, right? Well, May is named after Dr. Mae Jemison. We figured, how much trouble could a PhD in physics and chemistry actually get in? But again, why? Because the power to name is the power to define. The power to name is the power to define. And we have expectations of greatness of those 3 kids. We have expectations of greatness of those 3 kids. So let's keep moving. So folks, I don't have a lot of time to go into details here on this one, but you have to listen and learn from everyone. And you have to, as you go about this journey, listen to folks at all levels, whether they be above you, peers, or below you. And a lot of my mentors on this journey that you see listed below, they've been remarkable leaders that have had that ability to listen and learn from everyone. And I wish I had more time to share with you some of those stories about Senator Wofford. If you read Parting the Waters, he's one of the chapters in Parting the Waters. And then if you learn more about Father Hesburgh or others, there's lots of great stories to share. A couple of stories that I would just share and leave you with really quickly. What we say matters, but also where we stand matters, and who we have the courage to stand with matters. What we do matters more than what we say as well. Moving quickly, the central lesson here is this idea of keeping learning. And I don't have time to go into great detail here. It's a much longer story. But this is Michelangelo. And the reason this story is so important is, especially nowadays when we're constantly being disrupted and we're constantly having to try new things and pivot and go here and go there and relearn things and get new accreditations and certifications and new degrees and all of that, right? The reason this story is so important is Michelangelo was a prodigy. He was a prodigy, the most famous painter of his time. When he was 11, 12 years old, he had already surpassed his master. He had already surpassed the person he was apprenticing under. And one day, he gave all of that away. And even though he was making lots of money by that point, and everybody was coming from all over Italy to get painted by him because we didn't have cell phones to take your picture, and he was making lots of bank, he gave it all up. And he decided one day, even though he was an amazing painter, and you see the Sistine Chapel there, he decided to give it all up to become a sculptor. And because he was so famous and so renowned, nobody wanted to ask him why. But a little kid did, because little kids are fearless. Little kid went up to Michelangelo and said, "Yo, Mike, what's up? I don't really get it. Why would you give it all away? Why would you go and start and take up this thing sculpting when you're the best painter in the world, arguably?" And as rumor and legend had it, Michelangelo looked down at the little kid and he said, "Yo, I get it. I understand. But I was walking by a piece of marble and I saw an angel yearning to be free. I was walking by a piece of marble and I saw an angel yearning to be free." This is one of Michelangelo's first pieces. It's that angel yearning to be free. And as we pivot into the last section, folks, what this is about is to say we all have to have the courage to change, and to try new things and to master our craft when we do. But it is also to say that in our schools and in our churches, in our communities and our businesses, in every phase of our life, there are far too many angels yearning to be free. Let me wrap in the fourth trait, and that is that service and leadership are indistinguishable. And I don't have time to go into all of my heroes and mentors and on the journey, but I will share a few. And then I promise to take some questions right after that. So first, since I'm speaking to a largely business audience, it's critically important that in this moment, especially this moment, we have to have more players, coaches, and owners. I talked to you before about my paternal grandfather. My maternal grandfather was a player, coach, and owner of a Indiana, and I went to the University of Notre Dame. They called him Lafayette Dusty Riddle because when he slid into second base, a cloud of dust would pop up when he was stealing second. In our business community today, folks, and again, I got to go really, really quick, but in our community today, in the business world, we need more players, we need more coaches, we need more owners. And in particular, when you pause and you realize that we only have 3 Black CEOs of a Fortune 500 companies, we need more folks that are going to stay in this sector, advance, get the controls of power, and shape these institutions, these most powerful of all the sectors, shape these institutions to make a difference in the world. Those of us on this call have to answer that call. More players, more coaches, more owners. Last 2 slides, and then we'll throw it open to questions. So we all know this next person. I was honored to work with John Lewis to create and turn the Martin Luther King holiday into a National Day of Service. My old boss, who you saw on an earlier slide, Senator Wofford and John Lewis, both were advisors to Dr. King. And both of them would get visibly and tangibly upset after the formation of the King holiday when people would celebrate the day by taking the day off, when they would celebrate the day by sleeping in, because when they would celebrate the day by having a mattress sale. And so my old boss was fond of saying that we had to make it a day on, not a day off, a day of action, not apathy, a day of service, not shopping and sales. And so I worked with John Lewis to turn that federal holiday into a national day of service. And the key takeaway that I want to leave with you, not just good trouble about John Lewis, but this expression of leadership as we must be headlights, not taillights. And we must go into the world with an abiding sense of optimism and an abiding sense of service that stems from the blessings that all of us on this call have received. And then finally, folks, my last hero, my last shiro, as Janetta Cole would say, one of my other mentors, is a woman by the name of Dr. Marian Wright Edelman. Dr. Edelman is a remarkable woman of grace, and Dr. Edelman was the first Black woman lawyer in the state of Mississippi. And she went there to fight for civil rights. And if you can think about an African-American woman in the South fighting for civil rights in the time of the civil rights movement, it took unbelievable courage. She was recruited there by Medgar Evers. And not long after her arrival, Medgar was shot dead in his driveway by an assassin's bullet. And she stayed. Dr. Edelman is fond of saying, service is the rent we pay for living. Service is the rent we pay for living. And as that closing thought, folks, by virtue of being on this call, we have been blessed with amazing things. And we all know that you don't just magically pay the rent or pay the mortgage at the end of the month without working hard each and every day, each and every week, all month long. You got to work for it in order to be able to pay it at the end. And what she's saying is that each of us, according to our station, according to our stage of life, according to our gifts, are called to give back and to serve and to make a difference. That we are responsible, as the boys would say, as the talented 10th, to make a difference for everyone else. And as Mary McLeod Bethune would say, that we are responsible to lift as we climb. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, folks, if you wouldn't mind typing in some questions. We've got about 7 minutes left by my calculations, or I don't know how. Any questions I can answer? Questions in the Q&A box. Okay, let me see if I can find the Q&A box. Okay. How do you leadership is about, again, setting the agenda. It's about defining the situation. It's about the power to name as the power to define. And leadership means you're going to go in. Oh, I'm being told that the question wasn't heard. I've already moved on from that. Basically, it was saying, how do you lead when everybody around you believes the situation is hopeless? And what I was saying is, the power to name is the power to define, and we must believe we have the power to make change happen and to define the circumstance and the terms of the debate and the dialogue and to define the stage of the battle and the terms. Journey is one that we are on and will continue as we go forward. And so as we do that, as we move forward, we get to decide whether or not things can change or not by virtue of using our voice and helping shape that discussion. So last question that I will answer, and then I think okay, it looks like my camera has switched, but I'm not going to be able to change that back right now, folks, so we're just going to have to go with it. Next question is, what about the lack of leadership with elected officials? What are your thoughts about what we now face in terms of a triple pandemic? So again, where I come out, and this is true for myself personally, it's true for the business sector, and it's true for hopefully everyone. At the end of the day, right, we have to come back to this idea that we are the leaders that we have been waiting for, and that we, even as business leaders, have to step to the fore to make a difference, not just in business, but in other sectors as well. And if you had told me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, that the most powerful sector between nonprofit, government, and for-profit, and also the most progressive sector would be corporate America, I would have laughed at you. When I was growing up, we turned to government and we turned to nonprofits to be the most progressive forces of change and opportunity. And now where we are, and the reason we have to seize control of these institutions and these organizations and to influence them and bend them to how we lead and for whom we lead, is because we need these global institutions to be forces not just for shareholders, but for stakeholders, to do what is right and to help us on that journey. And corporations have helped move that needle, and we need them to continue to moving forward in the absence of leadership from nonprofits and in the absence of leadership from government. Right now, governments all around the world are hamstrung, both financially with deficits and with political infighting. Nonprofits, by virtue of their incorporation, can't make full-scale and scope changes of the type we need to battle the big issues of our time. We need all three to be working together, but ultimately, and especially for those on this call, there are other leaders that can lead in other sectors. By virtue of your MBA, we need you to be leading in corporate America and helping move these institutions to be institutions that can make a difference and work with those other sectors to make a difference on the big issues of our time. All right. So with that, I'm being told, Teray, back over to you. And thank you very much to the audience. And feel free to reach out at any point, whether that's on LinkedIn or Twitter or sending me an email.
All right, thank you so much, Marty, for that. I hope all of you had a great day today. It's been my pleasure to host these sessions, starting with the amazing Ian Levanzan and ending with Marty's chat. Thank you again to Marty and Accenture. Please be sure to complete the pop-up exit survey as you leave. And tonight, join us on IG, Instagram, the place to be. The handle is @TheBlackMBA, @TheBlackMBA. For MBA Live, a hot virtual party featuring DJ Apollo and DJ 5 Star. See you there. Thanks for being with us today. Peace.